Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today, we're thrilled to present The Janitor Heiress. This captivating story follows Kat, a millionaire heiress who hides her identity to work as a janitor, uncovering corporate corruption and finding an unexpected ally in Daniel. Before we begin, please hit that subscribe button. Enjoy! The fluorescent hum of the 23rd floor of Avery Holdings was a dull, constant thrum against Alara Vance's eardrums, a stark contrast to the whispered symphony of a private jet's engines that had once lulled her to sleep. Here, at precisely 3 a.m., the only kingdom she commanded was a gleaming mop bucket and a pungent cart laden with industrial-grade cleaning supplies. Each squeak of her rubber-soled shoes echoed in the cavernous, silent corridors, a ghostly reminder of the footsteps that would soon fill these halls, footsteps belonging to those who, unlike her, belonged here, or so they believed. Ilara, with her usually impeccable manicure now chipped and her soft hands roughened by harsh detergents, was a ghost in plain sight, a paradox wrapped in a faded blue uniform. Just hours earlier, a private doctor had gently informed her that her father, the indomitable Arthur Vance, founder and CEO of Avery Holdings, had little time left. The words, delivered in hushed tones amidst the hushed luxury of their Fifth Avenue penthouse, felt like a distant prophecy in this sterile, echoing office building. Arthur, a titan of industry, a man whose presence could fill a room with the sheer force of his will, was now a fragile shadow, tethered to a hospital bed. His last lucid words to Alara, delivered with a desperate grip on her hand, had been a stark warning. "The rot, it's deeper than you know, Alara. Don't trust anyone, not even old friends." He hadn't elaborated, his voice fading into a shallow cough, leaving Alara with a chilling premonition and a gnawing sense of urgency. The contrast between her life before and her chosen existence now was a chasm she navigated daily. Her past was a tapestry woven with bespoke designer clothes, glittering galas, and whispered conversations about mergers and acquisitions over Michelin-starred dinners. Her present, however, was a rough-spun fabric of scrubbing, polishing, and existing, an invisible cog in the massive machinery of her own family's empire. Why had she chosen this peculiar form of self-exile? The answer lay in her father's fading words, a chilling whisper of betrayal that resonated with her own long-held suspicions. She couldn't fight a phantom. She needed to understand the monster from the inside out, to map its veins and arteries, to see the true faces of its acolytes. Being Alara Vance, the heiress, would only blind her. Being Ellie, the night janitor, offered a unique, unfiltered lens. Her face, usually framed by cascades of perfectly styled chestnut hair, was now pulled back in a severe ponytail, revealing the faint lines of fatigue around her startlingly intense green eyes. She moved with a practiced efficiency, pushing her cart with a quiet determination that belied the turmoil within. Each discarded coffee cup, each half-eaten sandwich left on a desk, told a miniature story of the day's inhabitants. She saw the careless abandon of success, the subtle hierarchies painted on desk arrangements, the desperate attempts at personalization in a sea of corporate uniformity. These small observations, meticulously cataloged in her mind, were threads in a larger narrative she was beginning to weave. Tonight, the silence felt heavier, pregnant with unspoken truths. As she entered the executive wing, a chill prickled her skin, unrelated to the air conditioning. This was where the real power resided, where decisions were forged that rippled through thousands of lives. And it was here that she felt closest to the danger her father had hinted at. Her gaze swept over the polished mahogany doors, each one a portal to a personal kingdom. Suddenly, a faint light flickered from under the door of Marcus Thorne's office, the very name that had resonated with an unsettling chill in her father's weakened voice just hours ago, though he hadn't explicitly mentioned it. Marcus Thorne, the venerable co-founder, a man who had stood by Arthur Vance's side for decades, a man Alara had always considered a benevolent uncle. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. The light under Thorne's door was not a steady glow, but a series of quick, deliberate flashes, almost like Morse code. Curiosity, a dangerous siren in the silent night, tugged at her. She pressed her ear to the cold wood. A low murmur of voices, too muffled to distinguish words, drifted out. Then, a sharp, metallic click, the sound of a safe being closed. Alara's breath hitched. A safe? In Thorne's office? It was highly unusual for a private safe to be accessed at this hour, especially by anyone other than the most senior executives, and even then, usually during the day. The faint scent of expensive Cuban cigars, a scent she recognized from her childhood, wafted subtly from beneath the door. Thorne had always been partial to them. She pulled away, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. The innocent hum of the building now felt like a predator's purr. This was no ordinary late-night work session. This was something illicit, something secretive, something that aligned chillingly with her father's dying whispers. The simple act of cleaning now felt like a perilous reconnaissance mission. The ordinary mop in her hand transformed into a shield, her bucket a precarious bucket of truth. The world of Avery Holdings, once a golden cage, now felt like a labyrinthine trap, and she, the seemingly unassuming janitor, was its reluctant, hidden guardian. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the sky outside the panoramic windows, Alara knew her mission had just escalated from observation to desperate investigation. She clutched her mop handle, the cold plastic a grounding presence against the rising tide of fear and determination. She wasn't just cleaning offices, she was cleaning house, and the dirt, she now realized, ran all the way to the foundation. The faint, metallic tang of old coffee grounds still clung to Alara's nostrils as she pushed her mop bucket into the janitor's closet, the first blush of dawn painting the Manhattan skyline in hues of bruised purple and timid gold. Her mind, however, was still trapped in the velvety blackness of Marcus Thorne's office, replaying the almost imperceptible flickering light and the clink of a closing safe. It wasn't just suspicion. It was a cold, hard certainty that something sinister was brewing beneath the polished surface of Avery Holdings. Her father's warnings, once abstract fears, now took on a terrifyingly tangible form. The exhaustion that usually claimed her after a long night of cleaning was overshadowed by a frantic energy. She changed quickly out of her uniform, the cheap fabric feeling like a straitjacket against her skin. Outwardly, she was Ellie, the tired night shift janitor heading home. Inwardly, she was Alara Vance, heiress, strategist, and now, reluctant detective. The weight of her dual identity pressed down on her, a diamond hidden beneath layers of dust and anonymity. The world saw a lowly cleaner. She saw the empire she was fighting to save, piece by meticulous piece. Her small, sparsely furnished apartment, rented under a pseudonym miles from her penthouse, was a sanctuary of sorts, a stark symbol of her chosen asceticism. It lacked the opulent warmth of her childhood home, but it offered the quiet, unyielding solitude she needed to think. She brewed a strong cup of black coffee, the bitterness a welcome jolt to her frayed nerves. The image of Marcus Thorne, with his benevolent smile and avuncular demeanor, clashed violently with the clandestine activity she'd witnessed. He had always been the steady rock, the unwavering pillar beside her father. How could he be the serpent in the garden? The thought twisted her gut, a betrayal far more profound than any she had imagined. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a fragile whisper of a man who had forged an empire from sheer will and intellect. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to spot a flaw, a hidden agenda. Yet he had trusted Thorne. What blind spot had he missed? Or had the rot, as he'd said, simply grown too slowly, too insidiously, to be noticed until it was too late? The irony was brutal. The very foundation of her family's wealth, was now potentially crumbling from within, gnawed at by a wolf in sheep's clothing. As the city outside fully awoke, a new kind of routine began for Alara. During the day, she became a phantom observer, blending into the background of cafes near the Avery Holdings building, watching the comings and goings of key personnel. She studied their habits, their subtle interactions, searching for any anomaly. She began to pay closer attention to the faces she'd seen in the executive wing during her night shifts, especially those who seemed to gravitate towards Thorne's orbit. Each person became a potential clue, a thread in the sprawling, invisible web. It was during these daylight observations that her attention was consistently drawn to Daniel Miller. He was a man who moved with a quiet intensity, his brow often furrowed in thought, his sharp, intelligent eyes scanning documents with an almost predatory focus. He worked in the planning department, a crucial nexus of the company's future ventures. Alara had often seen him late at night, hunched over his desk, long after others had left. His dedication was palpable, a stark beacon in the often cynical corporate landscape. But it wasn't just his diligence that caught her eye. It was the way others treated him. She noticed the dismissive nods from mid-level managers, the casual way his ideas were sometimes appropriated without credit in group meetings she overheard. She saw the thinly veiled condescension from those who, by all accounts, were far less talented. Daniel was a brilliant mind, clearly, but he was also a target, a lone wolf in a pack that seemed intent on tearing him down, or perhaps exploiting him. He seemed to carry the weight of unseen burdens, a quiet despair simmering beneath his composed exterior. One afternoon, while nursing a lukewarm coffee near the company's entrance, Alara witnessed a particularly galling incident. Daniel, his face etched with frustration, emerged from a meeting with a senior project manager, a man named Henderson, a smarmy individual Kat had already flagged for his overly chummy interactions with Thorne. Henderson was practically preening, holding a binder that Alara recognized as Daniel's meticulously researched proposal for a major international expansion. "Brilliant work, Daniel," he boomed, loud enough for several passers-by to hear. "Absolutely brilliant. We'll be pushing this forward as the team's initiative. Great collaborative effort, really." The words were a thinly veiled lie, a brazen act of intellectual theft. Daniel's jaw tightened, a flicker of something akin to pain in his eyes, but he merely nodded, a forced, tight-lipped smile playing on his lips. He didn't protest, didn't argue. He simply absorbed the injustice, a silent martyr. The scene ignited a spark of anger in Alara. She recognized that same quiet suffering, that same forced resilience in herself from her own encounters with petty bullies on the janitorial staff. Daniel wasn't just being taken advantage of, he was being systematically undermined. That night, as Alara cleaned the planning department, her eyes lingered on Daniel's desk. It was meticulously organized, unlike many others, filled with complex flowcharts and financial models. Tucked beneath a stack of analytical reports, she saw a framed photo, a young woman with a kind smile, a child clinging to her leg, his family. A silent understanding washed over Alara. Daniel wasn't just fighting for his career, he was fighting for them. His quiet endurance was a shield, a sacrifice. This wasn't weakness, it was a profound, heartbreaking strength. A new layer of purpose began to form within Alara. Her initial quest was to expose Thorne and protect her family's legacy. But now she saw a parallel injustice, a systemic rot that extended beyond just financial fraud. It was a rot that crushed talent, exploited dedication, and rewarded mediocrity and deception. Daniel was a victim of this same insidious decay. He became, in her mind, not just a subject of observation, but a potential ally, a fellow traveler in this desolate landscape of corporate deceit. She began to alter her cleaning patterns, lingering longer in the planning department, subtly observing Daniel's habits. She noticed the slight slump of his shoulders after particularly stressful meetings, the way he would sometimes run a hand through his hair in exasperation. She saw the quiet determination that would rekindle in his eyes as he immersed himself back into his work, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was a force of nature, stifled by a system designed to hold him back. One evening, as she was emptying a waste bin near his desk, Daniel himself was still there, engrossed in a spreadsheet. He looked up, startled, as she accidentally bumped his chair. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Eliza stammered, her voice deliberately rougher, less refined than her natural tone. "Didn't see you there, sir." Daniel offered a tired smile. "No worries, just lost in numbers." His eyes, though weary, held a surprising depth, a flicker of intelligence that seemed to pierce through her Ellie facade for a fleeting moment. "Late night, huh?" she offered, her voice casual, as she rummaged loudly in her bin. "Always," he sighed, pushing himself back from the desk. "Some of us don't have the luxury of quitting at 5. There was no malice in his tone, just a weary resignation that spoke volumes about his struggle. "Tell me about it," Eliza chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Us janitors know all about long hours." Their eyes met for a brief second. In that fleeting connection, Eliza felt a strange pull, a recognition of shared burden despite their vastly different roles. He saw her as Ellie, the janitor. She saw him as a man of integrity trapped in a gilded cage. As the days bled into weeks, Eliza's understanding of the corporate landscape deepened. The pattern of Thorne's activities became clearer. His quiet, clandestine meetings, the sudden shifts in financial reporting, the unexplained transfers of funds. She started noticing Thorne's old friends, a network of seemingly legitimate business contacts who would visit his office, their conversations hushed, their expressions often guarded. These were the true conspirators, the architects of the rot her father had warned about. The tension within Eliza was a taut wire. She was accumulating evidence, but it was disparate, a mosaic missing key pieces. She needed concrete proof, something undeniable to present to her ailing father, to the board, to the world. She needed to know the full extent of Thorne's machinations, and she needed to find the exact moment, the vulnerable crack in his meticulously constructed facade. And somehow, she knew, Daniel Miller, the brilliant, long-suffering analyst, held a key, though he might not even realize it himself. The game was intensifying, and the hidden heiress was ready to raise the stakes. The faint light from Marcus Thorne's office continued to haunt Eliza, a relentless beacon in the labyrinth of her suspicions. The mundane rhythm of her janitorial duties now felt like a desperate dance, each sweep of the mop, each polish of a surface, a cover for her true purpose. She was no longer just observing, she was actively hunting, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that threatened to consume the very empire her father had built. Days melted into nights, each bringing new whispers of concern about her father's deteriorating health. The doctors were grim, their words cloaked in medical jargon that couldn't hide the stark truth. Arthur Vance was fading, and with him, perhaps, the last bastion against the insidious forces at play within Avery Holdings. This ticking clock amplified Eliza's urgency, turning her discreet investigation into a frantic race against time and an invisible enemy. Her focus sharpened on Thorne. She learned his habits, his associates, the subtle shifts in his demeanor. He was a master of disguise, a wolf cloaked in the wool of corporate respectability. During the day, she'd see him in the executive lounge, a picture of old money charm, exchanging pleasantries with board members, his laughter echoing a false warmth. At night, however, when the building quieted, a different Thorne emerged. He would work late, often joined by shadowy figures Eliza couldn't quite place. their conversations hushed, their faces obscured by the dim lighting of the executive offices. One particularly stormy night, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the skyscraper like a caged beast. Alara, armed with her trusty cleaning cart, found herself drawn to Thorne's office. The familiar flicker of light emanated from beneath the door, a sinister pulse in the darkness. Tonight, however, the murmur of voices was clearer, carried on a gust of wind that had forced open a poorly latched window in the adjacent corridor. She crept closer, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. She recognized Thorne's gravelly voice, laced with an unusual edge of impatience. "The old man is weakening. We need to accelerate the transfer. The European assets first, then the rest, before he makes any moves." Alara's breath hitched. Transfer? European assets? This wasn't just petty embezzlement. This was a systematic dismantling, a predatory dissection of Avery Holdings. She pressed her ear harder against the door, the cold wood a gateway to a horrifying truth. Another voice, smooth and unfamiliar, replied, "Patience, Marcus. Rushing this could expose us. The paperwork needs to be impeccable. We can't afford a single misstep, especially with Arthur's daughter hovering about." A cold dread washed over Alara, her stomach clenched. They knew about her. Not Alara Vance, the heiress, but Arthur's daughter, an entity to be watched, a potential threat. The casual mention of her existence sent a shiver down her spine, a realization that her cloak of invisibility might be thinner than she'd hoped. "She's just a child, a dilettante," Thorne scoffed, his voice laced with contempt. "Preoccupied with her charitable foundations and private jets. She barely knows the difference between a balance sheet and a grocery list. She won't be a problem." The dismissive words, though painful, were also a twisted validation. Her disguise was holding. They underestimated her, and that was her greatest weapon. But the contempt in Thorne's voice, aimed at her, at her father, was a venomous dart. He wasn't just stealing, he was mocking their legacy, their trust. Then came the words that sent an icy shock through her veins, a revelation that slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. The smooth voice continued, "Still, we need to ensure the proxy votes are secure for the upcoming board meeting. The Keston acquisition is the key. Once that goes through, with our nominated board members in place, the power shift will be irreversible. Arthur's last stand will be futile." Proxy votes? Keston acquisition? This wasn't just about money. It was power, control, a hostile takeover orchestrated from within. The magnitude of the plot unfurled before her, a monstrous tapestry woven with threads of betrayal and avarice. This wasn't just simple corruption. It was a coup d'etat, a carefully calculated maneuver to wrest control of Avery Holdings from her ailing father. The Keston acquisition, a seemingly innocuous expansion project, was merely a Trojan horse, designed to usher in Thorne's puppets onto the board, effectively disenfranchising her father, and, by extension, herself. The sounds inside the office subsided, replaced by the soft click of a lock. Alara quickly retreated, her mind reeling. The air in the corridor suddenly felt thin, suffocating. Marcus Thorne, the trusted co-founder, the benevolent uncle, was a viper, poisoning the very wellspring of her family's fortune. His betrayal was not merely financial, it was deeply personal, a stab at the heart of their trust, at the very fabric of the Vance legacy. The weight of his deception was heavier than any mop bucket she had ever carried. The truth hit her with the force of a tidal wave. Her father's cryptic warnings weren't about a fleeting instance of wrongdoing, but about a deep-seated conspiracy, a cancer that had metastasized throughout the company. Thorne wasn't just pilfering funds, he was systematically engineering a hostile takeover, exploiting her father's illness, and using the company's own assets to fund its destruction. As Alara walked numbly through the deserted corridors, the polished floors seemed to mock her, reflecting the distorted image of a desperate heiress disguised as a cleaner. Her earlier encounters with petty bullying from supervisors faded into insignificance. This was a war, fought in the shadows, against a foe who had been welcomed into the inner sanctum. She found herself, almost instinctively, gravitating towards Daniel Miller's section of the planning department. His desk, though tidy, held a faint aura of his presence, a lingering scent of determination and quiet struggle. She remembered the photo of his family, the small child, the kind wife. Daniel was fighting his own battles, unaware of the much larger war raging around him, a war he was inadvertently caught in. He was a brilliant mind, undoubtedly, but also a vulnerable one, exploited and undermined by the very system Thorne sought to completely control. A thought sharp and electrifying pierced through the fog of her fear. Daniel Miller. He was in planning. He would have access to the Keston acquisition documents. He would understand the financial maneuvers Thorne was making. He was a victim of Thorne's network, just like her. He was honest, resilient, and most importantly, an outsider to Thorne's inner circle. The prospect of revealing her true identity, of shattering the carefully constructed facade of Ellie, was terrifying. It meant exposing herself, becoming vulnerable, laying bare the truth of her predicament. But the alternative, watching her family's empire crumble from within, knowing her father's legacy would be corrupted and stolen by a man he trusted, was far more horrifying. Alara stopped at a large window overlooking the sleeping city, its lights twinkling like a million scattered diamonds. Her reflection stared back, a tired young woman with smudged uniform and resolute eyes. The moment of decision had arrived. She could continue to be Ellie, the invisible janitor, gathering crumbs of information, or she could gamble everything. She could trust. She could reveal herself to Daniel Miller, the brilliant, long-suffering analyst who knew the company's intricate financial heart better than anyone. He was her only hope, a desperate, risky gamble. The cold, logical part of her screamed caution, but the raw, emotional part, fueled by love for her father and burning rage at Thorne's betrayal, urged her forward. The game had just changed. The hidden heiress was about to reveal a piece of her crown. The decision, once a distant, terrifying possibility, now burned with a fierce clarity in Alara's mind. She had to trust Daniel Miller. The alternative, facing Marcus Thorne's insidious plot alone while her father slipped further away, was simply unthinkable. The very thought of revealing her true identity, of shattering the carefully constructed facade of Ellie, the janitor, sent a tremor through her. It meant vulnerability, exposing the raw, aching truth of her family's precarious position. But the stakes were too high, the danger too palpable. The next night, the air in the Avery Holdings building felt charged, electric with unspoken tension. Alara moved through the familiar corridors with a newfound purpose, her mop bucket no longer just a tool, but a symbol of the heavy secret it contained. She knew Daniel often stayed late, immersed in his spreadsheets, a quiet sentinel guarding the numbers that held the company's future. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the planning department, a drumbeat of anticipation and trepidation. Daniel was there, as expected, a lone figure, silhouetted against the glow of his computer screen. The fluorescent lights hummed above him, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow on his tired features. He looked up as she approached, his eyes still holding that weary intelligence she had come to recognize. "Ellie, still here?" he asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Rough night?" Alara leaned against her cart, her hands gripping the cold metal. This was it, the moment of truth. She took a deep breath, the scent of floor wax and stale coffee filling her lungs. Rougher than you know, Daniel." Her voice was low, devoid of the janitor's rough inflection, carrying a weight that immediately caught his attention. He paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, a flicker of curiosity replacing the weariness in his eyes. "Listen, I need to talk to you. Somewhere private," she said, her gaze sweeping the empty cubicles around them. "It's about Avery Holdings, about Thorne." Daniel's expression shifted, a subtle tightening of his jaw. "Thorne?" he repeated, his voice wary. "What about him?" "Not here," Alara insisted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The stairwell. 10 minutes." Without waiting for a response, she pushed her cart past him, her heart thumping. She felt his gaze linger on her back, a mixture of confusion and dawning suspicion. In the deserted stairwell, the silence was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the building's machinery and the frantic beat of Alara's own pulse. When Daniel arrived, his eyes were narrowed, a defensive posture in his shoulders. He was wary, and rightly so. "What's going on, Ellie?" he demanded, his voice low, firm. "This isn't like you." Alara met his gaze, her green eyes piercing through the facade she'd built. "Ellie is a role. My real name is Alara Vance." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with their implications. Daniel's eyes widened imperceptibly, his lips parted, but no sound emerged. He was a man accustomed to logic, to data, to order. This abrupt revelation, delivered by the quiet janitor, shattered all his preconceptions. "Arthur Vance's daughter," he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "But why? Why are you here, like this?" Alara explained, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She spoke of her father's illness, his cryptic warnings, her growing suspicions about Thorne, and finally, the chilling conversation she'd overheard. She recounted the details of Thorne's plan, the proxy votes, the Keston acquisition as a cover for a hostile takeover, the systematic bleeding of company assets. Her words painted a vivid, horrifying betrayal. As she spoke, Daniel's face transformed. The initial shock gave way to a cold, burning fury. He understood the numbers, the financial maneuvers she described. He had seen the anomalies, the sudden shifts in project funding, the unexplained discrepancies in resource allocation for the Keston acquisition, details he hadn't been able to reconcile, tiny threads of doubt that had always pulled at his professional conscience. He had dismissed them as corporate inefficiencies, or perhaps incompetence at higher levels. But now, through Alara's revelations, those disjointed pieces clicked into place, forming a terrifyingly coherent picture of calculated fraud. "He's been siphoning funds," Daniel said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "I saw the unusual expenditures for Keston, but they were buried deep in the subsidiary reports. He made it look like legitimate project costs, inflated but plausible. And the proxy votes? He's been courting the smaller, less engaged shareholders for months, offering incentives for their support." Alara felt a surge of relief, a fragile hope blossoming in her chest. He saw it. He understood. "So, you believe me?" she asked, her voice tinged with vulnerability. Daniel met her gaze, his eyes alight with a fierce resolve. "Believe you? Alara, this explains everything. The way my proposals were constantly undermined, the way my team was starved of resources, the sudden dismissal of my best ideas right before Thorne's brilliant solutions emerged. He wasn't just stealing my work, he was clearing the path. He's been systematically weakening departments like mine to ensure there's no internal resistance when he makes his move." A raw anger simmered in his voice, not just for himself, but for the company he had dedicated his life to, for the integrity he held so dear. He's a cancer, and he's been spreading for years. The shared outrage, the sudden realization of a common enemy, forged an immediate, powerful bond between them. The sterile concrete walls of the stairwell seemed to melt away, replaced by an invisible shield that enveloped them both. They were no longer the Heiress and the janitor, or the brilliant analyst and the overlooked employee. They were two souls united by a shared purpose and a burning desire for justice. "We need proof, undeniable proof," Eliza stated, her voice firm, strategic. "Something that can't be buried or dismissed. Something that will shatter his facade at the board meeting." "The board meeting," Daniel mused, his mind already racing. "It's in 2 weeks. He's rushing it. That means he needs those proxy votes locked in and the Keston acquisition finalized. He'll make his final move then." "Precisely," Eliza confirmed, "and we need to be ready. You understand the finances, the loopholes, the mechanisms he's using. I have access to the physical spaces, the discarded documents, the hidden corners." Daniel's eyes gleamed with a newfound focus. "My department, planning, handles the core financial projections for all major acquisitions. If Thorne is funneling funds through Keston, there will be a paper trail, a digital trail too. I can go through the historical data, cross-reference the reports, look for discrepancies in the capital allocation for Keston versus actual project progress." He paused, his brow furrowed in thought. He's good. He would have buried it deep, under layers of seemingly legitimate transactions. "But not deep enough," Eliza countered, a grim smile playing on her lips. He never anticipated a janitor seeing the truth. Their planning sessions began that night. Clandestine meetings held in deserted corners of the building after everyone had gone home, or in the quiet anonymity of late-night diners across the city. Eliza continued her janitorial duties, her movements now imbued with a sharper focus, each task a chance to gather a new piece of the puzzle. She noted the shredding schedules, the forgotten USB drives, the subtle changes in office security protocols. She became a silent shadow, slipping through the building like an apparition, her senses heightened, every detail a potential clue. Daniel, meanwhile, became a digital archaeologist. He delved into the company's vast databases, sifting through millions of lines of code and financial reports. He worked tirelessly, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his mind a whirlwind of numbers and logic. He discovered shell companies, intricate offshore accounts, and a complex web of transactions designed to obscure the true beneficiary of the Keston acquisition funds. He identified key figures involved in Thorne's network, seemingly legitimate suppliers and consultants who were in fact fronts for money laundering. The danger was palpable. One wrong move, one misplaced file, one careless whisper, and their entire plan could unravel, putting both their lives and Alara's father's legacy at risk. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight that would have broken lesser individuals. But a fierce determination, fueled by a shared sense of injustice and a growing unspoken admiration for each other, propelled them forward. The former heiress, cloaked in dust, and the brilliant analyst, shadowed by betrayal, had found their improbable alliance. The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation, and they were ready to pull back the curtain. The day of the board meeting dawned, a pristine blue canvas over Manhattan, belying the storm brewing within the glass walls of Avery Holdings. Eliza, no longer just Ellie, stood before her reflection, her usual janitor's uniform replaced by a sharp, dark suit. Her eyes, once tired, now held the glint of tempered steel, reflecting the culmination of weeks spent in shadows, weeks fueled by caffeine and a burning desire for justice. The diamond she had once hidden was now poised to blind those who sought to steal her legacy. Across town, Daniel, meticulously dressed and outwardly calm, felt the nervous energy crackle beneath his skin. The past weeks had transformed him. The quiet analyst, once resigned to being overshadowed, now carried himself with a quiet authority, a man who knew the truth and was ready to unleash it. The burden of secrecy, shared only with Eliza, had forged a bond between them that transcended their disparate worlds, a silent understanding built on shared purpose and an unspoken, growing affection.
His meticulous financial models, once relegated to obscure reports, were now the weapons in their arsenal, sharp and undeniable. The board meeting commenced in the opulent wood-paneled boardroom, a theater of power where fortunes were decided with a stroke of a pen. Marcus Thorne, resplendent in a tailored suit, presided with an air of unassailable confidence, his smile a practiced mask of benevolence. He spoke of the Keston acquisition with soaring rhetoric, painting a picture of unprecedented growth and strategic brilliance, his voice resonating with the false prophet's cadence. He knew the proxy votes were in his favor, meticulously secured through a network of shell companies and coerced shareholders. Victory, for him, was a foregone conclusion. Arthur Vance's chair at the head of the table remained empty, a poignant symbol of his ailing health and Thorne's perceived triumph. The board members, a mix of old guard loyalists and newly appointed figures subtly swayed by Thorne, listened, some with genuine interest, others with a complacent nod.
Just as Thorne was about to call for the final vote on the Keston acquisition, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. All eyes turned. There, framed against the brightly lit corridor, stood Eliza Vance, her presence radiating a quiet, unyielding power. Beside her, Daniel Miller, his gaze fixed on Thorne, carried a discreet, leather-bound briefcase. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Thorne's practiced smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation, then a dawning horror. Eliza, what is the meaning of this? This is a private board meeting. His voice was sharper than usual, betraying the crack in his composure. Eliza stepped forward, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the murmurs. It is, Marcus. But some matters of this company cannot be discussed in private anymore, not when its very foundation is being eroded by corruption. Her gaze, unwavering, pinned Thorne to his seat. Gasps filled the room. Board members exchanged bewildered glances. This was not the Eliza Vance they remembered, the socialite Heiress. This was a warrior. What absurd allegations are you making? Thorne roared, regaining a semblance of control, though a vein pulsed visibly in his temple. Have you gone mad, child? Your father is gravely ill. You should be at his side. My father, Eliza retorted, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, is a victim of your deceit, Marcus, just as Avery Holdings is. She turned to the board. For weeks, I have observed, I have listened, and I have gathered evidence of a systematic plot to defraud this company, orchestrated by Marcus Thorne. She gestured to Daniel. Mr. Daniel Miller, a brilliant analyst from our own planning department, has meticulously uncovered the financial machinations behind this plot. He will present the undeniable truth. Daniel stepped forward, the leather briefcases in his hand feeling heavier than lead, yet filled with the weight of justice. He connected a portable projector, and the large screen behind Thorne, which minutes ago displayed soaring profit projections, now glowed with complex flowcharts and damning financial statements. Members of the board, Daniel began, his voice calm, methodical, his years of being overlooked now fueling his quiet authority. For months, Marcus Thorne has used the proposed Keston acquisition as a smokescreen. The funds allocated were not for expansion, but systematically diverted to a network of offshore shell companies controlled by Thorne and his associates. This isn't just embezzlement. It's a calculated scheme to drain Avery Holdings of its assets, deliberately weakening its financial standing, all while securing his control through manipulated proxy votes. He clicked through slides, each one a nail in Thorne's coffin. Bank statements highlighting exorbitant, unexplained transfers. Emails between Thorne and his co-conspirators discussing asset liquidation and board restructuring. Visuals showing the inflated invoices from fake vendors,
masquerading as legitimate suppliers for Keston. The meticulous detail, the irrefutable data, painted a picture of betrayal so vast, so intricate, that the board members sat in stunned silence. Thorne, now visibly sweating, tried to interrupt, his voice raspy. "Lies! Fabrications! This is an attack on my character, a desperate attempt to discredit me." "Is it?" Eliza interjected, her voice cutting through his protestations. She clicked a button on a small, discreet device in her hand. A recording filled the boardroom. It was Thorne's voice from that stormy night, clear as a bell. "The old man is weakening. We need to accelerate the transfer. Before he makes any moves." And then, the chilling confirmation from his associate. The proxy votes are secure for the upcoming board meeting. The Keston acquisition is the key. Arthur's last stand will be futile.
The air in the room crackled with disbelief and outrage. The board members, many of whom had blindly trusted Thorne, now looked at him with a mixture of disgust and betrayal. His face, once jovial, contorted into a mask of pure fury, a cornered predator. Just then, the boardroom doors opened again. This time, Arthur Vance, frail but with a surprising spark in his eyes, was wheeled in by a nurse. His presence, an almost spectral vision, silenced the room completely. He looked at Thorne, a profound sadness and disappointment etched on his face, but also a flicker of his old steel trap resolve. "Marcus," Arthur rasped, his voice weak but clear in the stunned silence. "I gave you my trust, my company, my family." Thorne, utterly exposed, his carefully constructed facade crumbled. He lunged forward, a primal scream tearing from his throat, aiming for the projector, for the evidence that condemned him. But Daniel, quick as a flash, had already anticipated the move, pulling the laptop and projector back. Security guards, alerted by the commotion, rushed in and swiftly apprehended Thorne, his frantic struggles a pathetic display of his downfall. The illusion of power, the carefully cultivated image, shattered into a million pieces. The dust settled, quite literally, in the aftermath. Marcus Thorne was arrested, his network dismantled, and the full extent of his financial crimes and hostile takeover attempt was revealed to the world. The Keston acquisition was halted, its true, corrupt purpose laid bare. Avery Holdings embarked on a painful but necessary period of restructuring. Eliza, no longer the janitor, stepped into her rightful place at the helm, not as an absentee heiress, but as a leader forged in the crucible of adversity. Her time spent cleaning, observing, and understanding the company from the ground up proved invaluable. She knew the struggles of the lowest-paid worker, the frustrations of the overlooked talent. Her empathy was her strength, her deep understanding of the company's inner workings, her compass. Daniel Miller, recognized for his integrity and exceptional analytical skills, was promoted to a key executive position, becoming Eliza's trusted right hand. Together, they purged the company of the remaining corrupt elements, implementing new transparency measures and fostering a culture of integrity and meritocracy. The company, once a battleground, slowly began to heal, its foundations stronger than ever. The bond between Eliza and Daniel deepened, evolving from a strategic alliance into a profound partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a quiet, undeniable love. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable, in their most unexpected roles, and had found in each other a kindred spirit. Eliza, the hidden heiress, had found her voice, her purpose, and her true partner. Daniel, the overlooked genius, finally received the recognition he deserved, finding not just professional success, but a love that transcended the corporate battlefield.
Avery Holdings, battered but not broken, rose from the ashes, a testament to resilience, integrity, and the unexpected power of a janitor's hidden crown. To our valued audience, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey with the janitor Heiress. This story reminds us that true strength often lies hidden beneath the surface, that integrity can triumph over corruption, and that genuine connections can be forged in the most unexpected circumstances. Always trust your instincts, stand up for what's right, and remember that even in the darkest corners, a glimmer of hope can lead to profound change. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.